Chapter 3113 Shifeng couldn't help but gasp when he finished reading the Seven Luminaries Codex's attribute panel. Shifeng couldn't help but gasp when he finished reading the Seven Luminaries Codex's attribute panel. What powerful skills! As expected of a godly relic birthed alongside God's domain, I can't believe it has such power even in its current fragmented state. Seven Luminaries Codex, legendary rank, current, one of the godly relics birthed along with God's domain. The Seven Luminaries Codex carries 7 powers of creation. Currently, the Codex has been deprived of all 7 of these powers and only retains a small trace of eternal energy. Only by collecting all 7 powers can the Codex's power be restored. Cannot be destroyed. Cannot be traded. Cannot be dropped. The eternal energy in the Codex will dissipate over time. Currently, there are 365 days remaining until the Codex's energy dissipates completely. Additional active skill 1 Omni-refinement, refine all elements and substances unconditionally. No cooldown. Additional active skill 2 Elemental search, reveal all mineral veins within a 100,000-yard radius. Cooldown, 1 natural day. Additional passive skill 7 Luminaries Guidance, automatically detects fragments of the Seven Luminaries Codex within a 1,000,000-yard radius. Omni-refinement's ability to refine all elements and substances was a power that every power in God's domain would yearn to obtain. For lifestyle players, omni-refinement was a godly ability. The process of refining materials was the foundation of any production process. It was also the most important step in manufacturing an item. Moreover, the higher the rank of an item, the more difficult the refining process would be, and the lower the success rate would be. However, omni-refinement could complete this step with perfection. It wouldn't even be an exaggeration to say that players could get rich just by relying on the omni-refinement skill. For example, players could refine magic crystals into mana stones. 1. Typically, this was a process that required a master alchemist. Meanwhile, in addition to the material cost of 100 magic crystals per mana stone, master alchemists would also charge 2 magic crystals for their labor since the refinement process involved time and energy. However, with the Seven Luminaries Codex, Shifeng could refine 100 magic crystals into a mana stone with the push of a button, his efficiency many times greater than the average master alchemist. Even if he charged others a labor cost of only 1 magic crystal per mana stone, he could still make a killing. After all, he'd only need, at most, 1 second to produce a mana stone. That meant he could earn 1 magic crystal per second. With there being 48 hours a day in God's domain, he could easily earn up to 170,000 magic crystals per day. In the current miniature ancient world, 170,000 magic crystals were already the daily magic crystal income of a first-rate guild. Aside from omni-refinement, elemental search was also a skill that could cause the various powers in God's domain to lose their minds. Even the greater God's domain's various powers were no exception. Whether it was the production of items or the construction of settlements, both required a large amount of ores. Meanwhile, the most reliable way of obtaining ores was through mining mineral veins. However, mineral veins were extremely rare in God's domain, and even the most common copper veins and iron veins could cause powers to go to war with each other. This was because every mineral vein had a chance of magic stones. It was simply a question of how big the production volume was. Meanwhile, magic stones were one of the basic materials needed in the construction of towns and cities. It was also used to produce various daily items and furniture. Hence, the demand for magic stones was always higher than its supply, and mineral veins were highly contested among the various powers. In addition, the higher a mineral vein's rank, the rarer it would be. Veins capable of producing magic crystals had even become a symbol of wealth and strength for guilds. After all, no matter how powerful a guild settlement was, the amount of magic crystals it could generate per day couldn't hold a candle to even the most common magic crystal generating vein. With the elemental search skill, it would become much easier for Zero Wing to search for mineral veins. So this is why none of the greater God's domain's peak and hegemonic powers stand a chance against the various apex powers. Just this damaged Seven Luminaries Codex is already enough to elevate a hegemonic power's strength to the next level. An apex power with a complete godly relic simply isn't an opponent any peak or hegemonic power can hope to compete against, Shifeng thought to himself as he looked at the 7 Luminaries Codex. Although Shifeng had long since known that the greater god's domain's apex powers were not existences to be trifled with, only now did he understand just how frightening those apex powers were. It should be known that only 99 godly relics had existed at God's domain's birth, and every one of them possessed different functions. Out of those 99 godly relics, the 7 Luminaries Codex only ranked 45th according to the godly relic ranking list kept in the Great Galaxy Library. Yet, some of the greater god's domain's apex powers were in possession of godly relics ranked within the top 30. Moreover, the amount of time these apex powers had existed far surpassed the various superpowers in his homeworld. According to his knowledge, the youngest apex power in the greater god's domain had risen to its position over 600 years ago. In other words, this apex power was already in possession of a godly relic for over 600 years. Just thinking about the advantages this apex power had racked up using its godly relic throughout all these years sent shivers down Shifeng's spine. Not to mention, this was only the youngest apex power in the greater god's domain. There were still apex powers that had existed for a much longer time, such as the 7 Luminaries Alliance. A year. Shifeng couldn't help but frown when he saw the timer displayed on the attribute panel. It seems I'll have to enter the greater god's domain as soon as possible. Although Shifeng knew the clue for another mythical quest and said mythical quest was related to a top 30 godly relic, he would need to reach tier 5 first to get a hold of this clue. There was also no saying whether this clue was reliable or not. Hence, it would be much more realistic to rely on the 7 Luminaries Codex for his rise in God's domain. However, the 7 Luminaries Codex's fragments were scattered across the greater God's domain, and finding them would be incredibly challenging. This was the case even with the help of the 7 Luminaries guidance skill. Fortunately, his quest only required him to restore the 7 Luminaries Codex, not to restore it within a year. While the Codex might run out of energy in a year, so long as he managed to find one of the Codex's fragments within a year, he should be able to restore some of the Codex's energy and extend his quest's time limit. I guess I have no choice but to take things one step at a time. Shifeng sighed when he thought about the challenges that awaited him in the future. Then, he carefully put the 7 Luminaries Codex into his bag, called up the trial's interface, and chose to leave the trial space. Although he only needed to find one fragment for now, it was still an incredibly challenging task. The greater god's domain was simply massive. Out of the 12 starfields that existed in the greater god's domain, just one starfield already contained over 1,000 god's domains. Trying to find a fragment in these many god's domains was no different than finding a needle in a haystack. TL notes. 1. Players could refine magic crystals into mana stones. I guess the author forgot that he used to categorize refinement and synthesis separately. The process of turning magic crystals into mana stones used to be considered synthesis in the past. An example of refinement and synthesis being categorized separately, Chapter 374, Philosopher's Stone, Active Effect. Due to being damaged, the Philosopher's Stone possesses less than a seventh of its original strength. It can only be used for alchemical conversion, elemental refinement, alchemical synthesis, and elemental strengthening. 2. Changes made to Chapter 184. This was because nobody had managed to obtain even the smallest of clues regarding the 7 Luminaries Codex throughout the several hundred years the greater god's domain had existed. This was because nobody had managed to obtain even the smallest of clues regarding the 7 Luminaries Codex throughout the past several hundred years. Edit reason. I'm leaving this part vague since this chapter mentions that even the youngest apex power had risen to its position over 600 years ago. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3114 _ TL notes. Changed Shimmering Sword to Glimmering Sword 4 reasons. Slumber City, Abyssal Towers Lobby. Everyone from our main force is here now, Commander. The outer team's 600+ Novice Temple Knights have also finished gathering outside the city. With this, Purple Light will be utterly powerless to protect those people, Knight Revenant reported to Solitary Soul. Then, he smiled and added, "If Purple Light's members dare to intervene outside the city, we'll make it so that none of them can return to the city alive." The Purple Light Chamber of Commerce might be one of Slumber City's peak powers, but it had the fewest Temple Knights and Novice Temple Knights out of all the peak powers in Slumber City. More specifically, Purple Light had fewer than 30 Temple Knights and a little over 300 Novice Temple Knights. The only reason Purple Light was even considered a peak power was because of its wide business connections. Purple Light had trade deals with even the peak powers of several neighboring cities. Because of these connections, Purple Light had the most combat puppets out of all powers in Slumber City, its combat puppet count exceeding 100. If a Novice Temple Knight was given control of a basic combat puppet, they could exhibit combat power rivaling official Temple Knights. However, Purple Light's combat puppets were typically reserved for the protection of important resource nodes, and few of its combat puppets were stationed in Slumber City. Meanwhile, the transportation of combat puppets was incredibly troublesome since they couldn't be stored in ordinary spatial bags. Only epic spatial bags could store combat puppets, and the average epic spatial bag could store around 10 combat puppets. However, epic spatial bags were rarer and more expensive than even fragmented legendary items, and Purple Light only had a few of them. Not to mention, Purple Light's combat puppets were still needed to defend its resource nodes. All in all, the combat power Purple Light could afford to mobilize in Slumber City was, at most, around a dozen Temple Knights and 100 Novice Temple Knights. Good. Have everyone get ready. Those people should be coming out soon, Solitary Soul said, nodding. Wolf Emperor's side remains a problem, Commander. Seeing as Wolf Emperor is still here, it's clear that he plans on watching. If he decides to help the other side in a crucial moment, we'll most likely have difficulty taking down those people, Knight Revenant said as he warily glanced at the middle-aged man drinking alcohol at the distant bar. In addition to being one of the top 5 experts of Slumber City, Wolf Emperor also had around 50 Temple Knight level experts following him. If he decided to help Purple Light's side, it would put Death Curse at a considerable disadvantage. Ignore him. That battle maniac has already promised not to intervene on the condition that I duel him afterward, Solitary Soul said nonchalantly. He's growing restless already? Knight Revenant couldn't help but take a few extra glances at Wolf Emperor when he heard Solitary Soul's words. It was widely known that Wolf Emperor was a battle maniac. It was also obvious that Wolf Emperor had already converted to a higher race, so his strength must have seen significant improvements. Although Knight Revenant had guessed that Wolf Emperor would challenge the other top 5 experts of Slumber City after making these improvements, he didn't think that the other party would make a move so soon. It's fine. Even if he didn't come to find me, I would have gone to find him for a duel sooner or later, Solitary Soul said, a trace of fighting spirit surfacing in his eyes. Slumber City's 3 administrators were extremely elusive and hard to meet. Although Solitary Soul had recently become one of Slumber City's administrators, he still had no idea how strong he was compared to the other top 5 experts. He also didn't know whether he could become the strongest expert in the city, so he needed to test his strength against a sufficiently strong opponent. However, out of the 4 other top 5 experts, 3 were Slumber City's administrators, and all 3 were extremely elusive and hard to meet. This left only Wolf Emperor as a potential opponent for Solitary Soul. Now that Wolf Emperor had taken the initiative to challenge him, it couldn't be better news for him. While Solitary Soul and Knight Revenant were talking, a commotion suddenly erupted in the lobby. Immediately, Solitary Soul, Knight Revenant, and the other Death Curse members turned toward the source of the commotion. At this time, the crowd in the lobby suddenly moved aside and opened up a path for a woman with long light blue hair. The woman wore a silver crown on her head, covered her body in silvery white light armor, and carried a beautiful long sword that gave off a light blue sheen around her waist. The woman looked like a goddess of war as she slowly walked down the aisle created by the crowd. The glimmering sword. I must be hallucinating. Why is the glimmering sword here? Crap. What day is it today? I can't believe 3 out of Slumber City's 5 hegemons have gathered in the Abyssal Tower. Many players in the lobby widened their eyes in shock when they saw the level 120 woman with light blue hair appearing in the Abyssal Tower. Lorda Crader. In addition to being the owner of the nickname Glimmering Sword, Laura Crader was also publicly recognized as the most talented individual Slumber City had seen in the past few decades. Unlike Wolf Emperor, who had carved his legacy in Slumber City step by step, Laura Crader had appeared very abruptly. By the time people learned about her existence, she had already defeated the 2 administrators of Slumber City at the time and became Slumber City's #1 expert. Good. Quicksand made it in time. Echoing Judgment breathed a deep sigh of relief when he saw Laura Crader appearing in the lobby. Unlike what most people assumed, the Purple Light Chamber of Commerce wasn't subordinated to Laura Crader. Instead, Laura Crader owed Purple Light a favor due to the help Purple Light had offered her many years ago. Hence, Laura Crader publicly announced that Purple Light was under her protection. It was also because of Laura Crader's announcement that most powers in Slumber City dared not provoke Purple Light throughout all these years. Death Curse was the only exception since the adventurer team sought to dominate the entire Slumber City. Glimmering Sword. I didn't think you would make an appearance for Purple Light. It seems I have underestimated Purple Light's place in your heart, Solitary Soul said, a hint of astonishment in his eyes when he saw Laura Crader approaching him. I owe Purple Light a huge favor. Now that Purple Light needs my help, I naturally won't stand by and do nothing, Laura Crader said as she looked at Solitary Soul calmly. I'll get to the point. Give up on targeting those people. Otherwise, our 2 adventurer teams will have no choice but to go to war. After Laura Crader finished speaking, the lobby fell silent as everyone stared at her in surprise. They didn't think that the Glimmering Sword would be willing to go to war with Death Curse for the sake of some outsiders. Laura Crader's Glimmer adventurer team might be powerful, but Death Curse was no pushover. If the 2 adventurer teams went to war, both sides would suffer severe losses. What a wonderful threat. Solitary Soul laughed. Unfortunately, there is nothing you can do to stop those people from dying today. Moreover, I'm very curious to test whether you really are as strong as the rumors make you out to be. After Solitary Soul finished speaking, the intensity of his aura suddenly spiked. Immediately, most of the players present, including Echoing Judgment and the others, felt their hearts constrict in fear. Tier 4. Echoing Judgment couldn't help but look at Solitary Soul in disbelief. How can his aura be at the Tier 4 standard? Tier 4 was a tier no player in the stratified abyssal realm could reach. However, Echoing Judgment wasn't a stranger to a Tier 4 existence's aura because he had watched a fight between Tier 4 NPCs in the past. Meanwhile, the aura Solitary Soul currently radiated was just as strong as the aura those Tier 4 NPCs exuded. He got himself a piece of legendary equipment. Wolf Emperor thought as he looked at Solitary Soul, a hint of fear and excitement appearing in his eyes. This is interesting. I didn't think that old fox had kept so much strength hidden. With this, even the Glimmering Sword will have trouble against him. Wolf Emperor would often wander around picking fights. So, this wasn't the first time he had come across a player with a Tier 4 aura. While silence enveloped the lobby, multiple streaks of light suddenly appeared in the Abyssal Tower's teleportation hall, signifying that someone had just completed their test in the tower. Meanwhile, these people were none other than Shifeng and his team. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 31:15 Once the flashes of light disappeared, the figures in the Abyssal Tower's teleportation hall entered the sights of everyone in the lobby. Once the flashes of light disappeared, the figures in the Abyssal Tower's teleportation hall entered the sights of everyone in the lobby. Are they the players Death Curse is targeting? How pitiful these people are. I doubt even the Glimmering Sword can protect them now. They asked for it. Out of everyone they could have provoked, they just had to choose Death Curse. Things would have never turned out like this had they not chosen to help Purple Light. I heard that Death Curse had prepared a Death Curse for these people. So long as these people get banished out of the city, Death Curse's members will immediately place this curse on them. If they get killed with this curse in effect, not only will they lose 3 levels, but they'll also have a high chance of dropping the items on their bodies and in their bags. If they get killed a couple of times with this curse and fall below level 100, they will be forcibly sent back to the starting zone. If that happened, They'd have to compete for those few teleportation slots all over again if they want to enter level 100 plus maps again. It took me half a year to secure a teleportation slot for myself back then. Now that the starting zone's player population has grown larger, getting a teleportation slot has become even more difficult. My nephew is still stuck in the starting zone even after struggling for over a year. When the spectating crowd saw Shifeng and his teammates appearing in the lobby, they couldn't help but look at Shifeng's team sympathetically. Laura Crader's arrival might have surprised everyone, but judging by the current situation, the mighty glimmering sword might have trouble keeping her position as Slumber City's #1 expert today. Needless to say, she'd be even more powerless to protect Shifeng's team. In addition, Solitary Soul was now a Vice City Lord in Slumber City. Although Laura was similarly a Vice City Lord, she did not have the right to stop Solitary Soul from banishing other players from the city. Hence, Laura could only threaten Solitary Soul and figure out a way to make him give up on targeting Shifeng's team. Revenant. Identify their names. Solitary Soul said, smirking as he looked at Shifeng's team. Roger. Night Revenant also smirked as he said, everyone, do it. After Night Revenant finished speaking, multiple Death Curse members hiding among the crowd crushed the crystal rune in their hands. Immediately afterward, a magic array appeared in the eyes of these Death Curse members, the magic array giving their eyes a golden glow. Holy Seal's Eye. Shifeng was quite surprised as he looked at the Death Curse members with glowing golden eyes. Holy Seal's Eye was an incredibly precious master rank identification skill. Not only could it see through the Black Cloak's concealment effects, but it could also see through high-ranking disguises. Most importantly, Holy Eye's seal could be used to analyze master magic arrays and above, assisting players in decoding the various magic barriers in God's domain. This ability was especially crucial when players were raiding ancient ruins. Out of the many ancient ruins that existed in God's domain, most of them would have some sort of barrier that prevented players from entering. Meanwhile, players could only enter these ruins after cracking these barriers. Hence, a Holy Seal's Eye could easily sell for the price of a level 100 epic weapon in God's domain. Meanwhile, to obtain their Real IDs, Death Curse had used 20 Holy Seal's Eye. If the various powers of God's domain were to learn of this, they would definitely curse at Death Curse's prodigal behavior. We've verified their IDs already, Commander. Night Revenant said as he sent the IDs of Shifeng's team members to Solitary Soul. Then, he turned to look at Shifeng's team with a gleeful look. Damn it. Echoing Judgment's complexion turned ashen when he saw Death Curse's members using as many as 20 Holy Seal's Eye. He didn't think that Death Curse would go to such lengths to get revenge on Shifeng's team. So long as Solitary Soul managed to find out the IDs of Shifeng's team members, he could easily get them banished from Slumber City using his privileges as a Vice City Lord. There was also nothing anybody could do about it. Echoing Judgment had also tasked someone to secretly check the situation outside the city, so he knew that Death Curse had mobilized nearly 100 Temple Knights and 600 plus Novice Temple Knights to ensure that Shifeng's team did not escape. Death Curse had even set up a master magic array at the city's entrance. There was no way Shifeng's team could survive once they got removed from the city. It was also unlikely that Laura could save Shifeng's team from Death Curse. Meanwhile, after Solitary Soul typed in the IDs of Shifeng's team members into Slumber City's management interface, he couldn't help but frown as he said, "They have 8 upper-class nobles?" 8 upper-class nobles? Night Revenant couldn't help but look at Shifeng's team in disbelief when he heard Solitary Soul's words. How is this possible? Upper-class nobles were special existences in the stratified Abyssal Realm's various NPC cities. So long as players acquired the status of an upper-class noble in a city, not only would they enjoy an extremely high status in the city, but they would also gain voting rights to determine the direction of the city's development. Meanwhile, even Vice City Lords didn't have the authority to deal with upper-class nobles. Aside from those privileges, upper-class nobles would also gain a passive aura that weakened the dark-type monsters around them. It was also because of this aura that the various powers and experts were very keen on recruiting and befriending upper-class nobles. However, it wasn't an easy task to become an upper-class noble. Take Slumber City, for example. Even after several decades of development, Less than 100 players had managed to become an upper-class noble in Slumber City. The number of upper-class nobles in the city was significantly lower than even the number of official temple knights. Yet, now, it was revealed that Shifeng's small team of 20 had as many as 8 upper-class nobles. That was already more than the upper-class nobles that Death Curse had. In other words, Shifeng's team of 20 had greater speaking rights than Death Curse in Slumber City. This was simply unbelievable. At this time, even Echoing Judgment was stunned by Solitary Soul's words. Unlike Death Curse's members, Echoing Judgment knew that this was the first time Shifeng's team members had come into contact with the Abyssal Tower. Yet, despite this being their first time challenging the Abyssal Tower, 8 of them had managed to become upper-class nobles. Shifeng's team was simply a gathering of monsters. Of those present, only Shifeng found this situation unsurprising. Not only did God's domain possess complete legacies, but it also had an environment that was much more conducive for mana development. Hence, God's domain's players were vastly superior to the stratified Abyssal Realms players when it came to mana control. Based on Shifeng's evaluation of the Abyssal Tower, so long as a God's domain player reached the World Tower's 2nd floor standard, they could almost certainly clear the Abyssal Tower's 3rd floor and become an upper-class noble. So that's why Purple Light has gone as far as to call on the Glimmering Sword to help you, Solitary Soul said, his expression growing even colder as he looked at Shifeng's team. But so what if 8 of you are upper-class nobles? The rest of you are only ordinary nobles. I can still banish these 12 from the city for 48 hours. As soon as Solitary Soul finished speaking, a group of fully armed NPC guards walked in from the Abyssal Tower's entrance. Every one of these NPC guards was at level 130 or above. The 2 guard captains were even level 135, tier 4 NPCs. What a crazy bastard. He's actually planning on making an enemy out of 8 upper-class nobles, Wolf Emperor commented. When he saw the NPC guards appearing, he understood that Solitary Soul intended to take care of Shifeng's team and establish his dominance over Slumber City, even if it meant making an enemy out of 8 upper-class nobles simultaneously. However, Wolf Emperor also had to admit that Solitary Soul had the qualifications to act arrogantly. After all, with a piece of legendary equipment in his possession, Solitary Soul could not only stand at the apex of Slumber City, but he could even extend his reach into Shadow City, the most prosperous and powerful city in the stratified Abyssal Realms northern region. After the several dozen NPC guards walked up to Blackie and the others, one of the guard captains took out a piece of parchment and recited, according to Slumber City's rules, as punishment for challenging Vice City Lord Solitary Soul's authority, you will be banished from the city for 48 hours. Please follow us out of the city. Black Flame, is it? When Night Revenant saw that the NPC guards were about to take Blackie and the others away, he turned to Shifeng and laughed, saying, "This is what happens when you offend Death Curse. Of course, this is only the beginning. You will soon learn what kind of miserable fate awaits you for going against Death Curse." Miserable fate. Shifeng couldn't help but chuckle at Night Revenant's remarks. Then, he walked straight up to the stern-looking NPC guards. "If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible." Chapter 3116 When the spectating crowd saw the several dozen NPC guards surrounding Blackie and the others, they couldn't help but look at them sympathetically. When the spectating crowd saw the several dozen NPC guards surrounding Blackie and the others, they couldn't help but look at them sympathetically. Normally, Blackie and the others would have been the envy of many players since they now possessed Slumber City's noble status. This was because, in a certain sense, the status of players in the various NPC cities was much more important than their strength in the stratified Abyssal Realms level 100+ maps. In Slumber City, players with the civilian status would only enjoy the privilege of being able to live in the city. Without a higher status, they couldn't take on more than a certain number of city contribution quests each month, own private housing, or open their own shop. They couldn't even enter Slumber City's advanced auction house, only having access to the standard auction house. However, it was a different story for players with the noble status. Whether it was challenging more city contribution quests or purchasing private housing and shops, neither of these things were a problem so long as a noble had enough demon coins. Moreover, So long as players had the noble status, they could earn demon coins much more quickly than civilian players. This was because noble players could earn a significant sum of demon coins each month just by renting properties to civilians. There wasn't a need to worry about there being a lack of customers, either, since less than 3% of the city's player population had the noble status. Of course, nobles couldn't purchase an unlimited number of lands or shops. Depending on their city contribution points, they could buy 2 at minimum and 5 at maximum. Even so, a noble with 5 plots of land or shops could retire for the rest of their lives without worrying about living expenses in the real world. Many nobles had even relied on this method to live without working for over a decade already. However, at this moment, this noble status was turned into a complete joke because of Solitary Soul. Because Solitary Soul had evoked his rights as a Vice City Lord, Blackie and the others were getting banished from Slumber City for 48 hours. Moreover, this banishment duration would not decrease if Blackie and the others went offline. The banishment period would only end after they had spent 48 hours outside of Slumber City. With the Death Curse Adventurer team's strength, 48 hours was more than enough for its members to kill Blackie and the others at least a dozen times, causing them to fall under level 100 and forcibly teleported back to the starting zone. Moreover, even if Death Curse didn't target Blackie and the others, it would be impossible for a team of 12 players to survive for 48 hours out in the fields. After all, it was extremely dangerous to roam out in the fields without a team of 100 or 200 players. It was especially true when night arrived. Not only would the number of monsters increase at night, but the combat standards of monsters would also increase significantly. Even an upper-class nobles team wouldn't dare to casually operate outside at night. It was so dangerous at night that players wouldn't necessarily be safe even if they stood directly outside the city. This was because a large number of monsters would attack Slumber City at night. Seeking shelter in a different NPC city wasn't an option, either. The various NPC cities in the stratified Abyssal Realms level 100+ maps were located incredibly far apart from each other. Even if players traveled non-stop, they would still need around 2 days, 96 in-game hours, to move from one city to another. If players traveled at a normal pace, the journey would take up to 5 or 6 days. Hence, there was no way Blackie and the others could reach another NPC city within 48 hours. In other words, getting banished from Slumber City for 48 hours was no different than a death sentence. Quick! Look over there. Their leader is walking over to the NPC guards. Could he be trying to reason with those guards? He's just going to waste his energy if he's thinking of doing that. The NPC guards will kill even players with the noble status when provoked. Now that they are in the midst of executing an order, they might even kill players who enter their cordon. Not to mention, these NPCs will only stubbornly carry out their orders and won't listen to reason. The spectating players shook their heads when they saw Shifeng suddenly approaching the NPC guards. NPC guards were essentially gods in the various NPC cities. They were also the last thing players wanted to approach. This was because NPC guards did not listen to reason. So long as players violated the law, the NPC guards would kill them on the spot. Even upper-class nobles were no exception. Even if the NPC guards weren't in the mood for bloodshed, it was also pointless to try to reason with them. The only thing on their mind was to carry out their orders. Everything else was not within their consideration. Rather than try to obstruct the NPC guards from carrying out the banishment process, what Shifeng should be doing was figure out a way to amass some strength and ensure that his banished companions could survive out in the fields. Did he lose his mind to anxiety? Night Revenant couldn't help but laugh when he saw Shifeng moving closer and closer to the NPC guards. Or does he think that his upper-class noble status is enough to make those NPC guards listen to him? Upper-class nobles might enjoy a high status in Slumber City, but they still lacked the qualifications to challenge the city's laws. Even Vice City lords like Solitary Soul and Laura Crader didn't have the qualifications to do so. Otherwise, the Glimmering Sword wouldn't have gone through the trouble of using the threat of war to try and stop Death Curse's actions. Meanwhile, when Echoing Judgment saw Shifeng's actions, he swiftly ran after Shifeng in an attempt to stop him from moving any closer to the NPC guard's cordon. Unfortunately, he was still a step too late. Not only did Shifeng cross the NPC guard's cordon, but he had even approached the two NPC guard captains directly and stood in their way. If his intentions hadn't been clear enough before, it was now very obvious that he was trying to stop these NPC guards from apprehending his teammates. Is he crazy? Knight Revenant nearly gaped in shock when he saw Shifeng intercepting the NPC guard captains. The difference between intruding on the NPC guard's cordon and obstructing the NPC guard captain's actions was like night and day. In the former case, the NPC guards would, at most, kill the intruding player once. However, in the latter case, the NPC guards would apprehend the obstructing player and imprison them for half a month to an entire month. This was worse than getting killed 3 or 4 times. Meanwhile, when the two NPC guard captains saw Shifeng appearing before them, their first reaction was to reach for their weapons. However, just when everyone thought that the two guard captains were about to strike at Shifeng, the two guard captains suddenly froze, a hint of fear appearing in their eyes as they looked at Shifeng. The two guard captains behaved like two rats standing in front of a mouse, neither daring to move a muscle. Esteemed Lord Legatee, the two guard captains saluted Shifeng after coming to their senses. Then, they asked respectfully, "May we know what orders you have for us? If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible." Chapter 31:17 The words of the two NPC guard captains surprised and stunned everyone present in the lobby. The words of the two NPC guard captains surprised and stunned everyone present in the lobby. I must be hallucinating. Since when did NPC guards start treating players so respectfully? Could those guards be fake? He's already crossed the cordon. Even the glimmering sword with her Vice City Lord status would be killed if she did that. Yet, why aren't these guards taking action? Everyone was confused when they saw the NPC guard captains behaving so respectfully in front of Shifeng. Even Echoing Judgment, who had tried to stop Shifeng, froze as he looked at this situation in disbelief. NPC guards were incredibly rigid, and they would never show mercy to players. Even players who had received the Vice City Lord status could only get NPC guards to move when ordering them to exercise their authority to banish players. Moreover, these NPC guards would only show these Vice City Lords a cold expression throughout their entire interaction. Yet, now, the two NPC guard captains wore a look of reverence as they faced Shifeng. Indeed, reverence. This was an expression that one would typically only see civilian NPCs making when standing in front of players with the upper-class noble or Vice City Lord status. Or, more specifically, NPCs would only show such an expression when the player they faced possessed a vastly superior status. Could his status be higher than even Vice City Lords? Echoing Judgment wondered as he looked at Shifeng in disbelief. Over the past several decades, the Vice City Lord status was known to be the highest status a player could achieve in the stratified Abyssal Realms NPC cities. It was also a symbol for the stratified Abyssal Realms' strongest combatants. This fact had remained unchanged throughout the past several decades. Aside from Echoing Judgment, Knight Revenant was similarly confused by this situation. Obstructing NPC guards from carrying out their duties was an offense punishable by death. Even Vice City Lords would be killed mercilessly if they tried to do so. There was no room for negotiations whatsoever. While everyone was bewildered by this situation, Shifeng pointed at Blackie's group and said to the two NPC guard captains, "These are my friends. I can assure you that they have never done anything to challenge a Vice City Lord's authority. This is just the slander of Vice City Lord Solitary Soul. We trust in your words, Lord Legatee. In addition, since these people are your friends, they can naturally keep on living in the city. However, they will still have to abide by Slumber City's laws. Otherwise, even if they are your friends, they will still have to face Slumber City's punishment, Lord Legate," one of the guard captains said as he did a knight's salute. Then, he said to the NPC guards surrounding Blackie's group, "Everyone, stand down. These people are innocent." Understood. The NPC guards promptly kept away their weapons and stopped targeting Blackie's group. Meanwhile, the NPC guards' behavior thoroughly dumbfounded everyone present. Even a Vice City Lord's authority is useless against him? I must be dreaming. This is a banishment order from a vice city lord. Even another vice city lord wouldn't have the authority to dismiss this order. Who is that guy? I heard the guard captain referring to him as Lord Legatee just now. Could there be an obtainable status higher than the vice city lord status? How can that be? Vice City Lord has been the highest obtainable status in the various NPC cities for so many years already. How can an outsider like him have a status higher than the Vice City Lords of Slumber City? Shifeng's action of getting the NPC guards to withdraw with only a few words greatly shocked the spectating crowd. Even the executives of Slumber City's various powers, such as Echoing Judgment, gaped in shock at this sight. Before today, the authority of Vice City Lords was unshakable in the various NPC cities. What Shifeng just did was unprecedented in Slumber City. Moreover, the NPC guards had withdrawn from the scene so decisively, making it seem like the Vice City Lord's position Solitary Soul had gone through great lengths to obtain was nothing but a joke. How did you do it, guild leader? Blackie asked through the team chat. Although he was still feeling a little nervous even after seeing the NPC guards withdraw, he couldn't hold back his curiosity any longer. Blackie wasn't the only one curious to know what had happened exactly. Crimson Heart, Bloodhammer, and the others were also eager to learn about the situation. Their team of 20 had entered the stratified Abyssal Realm together. This was also their first time entering the Abyssal Tower and obtaining status in Slumber City. Yet, just when they thought that they were finally on the same starting line as Shifeng after obtaining an upper-class noble status, they came to realize that Shifeng was still leagues ahead of them. Crimson Heart and Cleansed Rue were especially confused by this situation since the two of them were well aware of Zero Wing's situation. They were the ones who brought Shifeng into this stratified Abyssal Realm, so they knew that this was definitely Shifeng's first time visiting this stratified Abyssal Realm. In addition, even if Shifeng possessed more knowledge about God's domain than they did, there were many different stratified abyssal realms in God's domain, and not all information on the various stratified abyssal realms was universal. Yet, after entering this stratified abyssal realm, not only did the gap between them and Shifeng not shorten, but it even felt like it was growing larger and larger. Moreover, it was also because of Shifeng that 100 Flower Palace's members managed to survive the ordeal this time. Nothing special. It's just that my authority is slightly higher than his, Shifeng explained through the team chat. Slightly higher? When Bloodhammer heard Shifeng's answer, he couldn't help but ask, could you have cleared the fourth floor's trial already, Guild Leader Black Flame? The Abyssal Tower's trial space had 5 floors. So long as one managed to clear the third floor's trial, one would gain the status of an upper-class noble. Find the original at H*stead novel. Bloodhammer and the others had struggled desperately just to clear the third floor's trial. Even then, they had barely managed to complete it before they ran out of time. As for the fourth floor's trial, it wasn't an exaggeration to say that it was a despair-inducing challenge. Not only did they have to go up against mythic monsters on the fourth floor, but they even had to fight 9 of them simultaneously. It should be known that the Abyssal Tower's trial wasn't merely a test of strength. It was also a test of adaptability. However, adapting to the trial space's mana environment was simply too difficult of a task. Just getting their bodies to adapt to the flow of the trial space's dark mana was already their limit. They had no energy to spare to research and construct the magic array outlined by the dark mana. MHM. I passed it by luck, Shifeng said, nodding. Players would need to successfully construct the magic array composed entirely of dark mana if they wanted to have a chance at clearing the fourth floor's trial. However, normally, even a Grandmaster magician like himself shouldn't have been able to construct the magic array within such a short period of time. This was because the arrangement of the dark mana was rather unique. If he hadn't become a primal human and obtained the Eyes of Reality, which allowed him to see the dark mana's operating principles clearly, he wouldn't have been able to see the magic array's entire structure. Naturally, he wouldn't have been able to draw the entire magic array, either. Meanwhile, realization dawned on Bloodhammer, Crimson Heart, and the others when they saw Shifeng nodding. They also couldn't help but smile bitterly over the gap between them. If Shifeng had managed to conquer the despair-inducing fourth floor trial, it was completely understandable for him to obtain a position above upper-class nobles. It wouldn't even be strange if he had managed to obtain status surpassing that of Vice City Lords. According to Echoing Judgment, not a single player in the stratified Abyssal Realm's various NPC cities had ever managed to clear the Abyssal Tower's 4th floor. Echoing Judgment had even gone as far as to say that the 4th floor trial was a prank by the main god system, and no player could ever complete it. On the other side, Echoing Judgment breathed a deep sigh of relief when he saw the NPC guards disbanding their cordon. Now that Shifeng's team could remain inside Slumber City, there was nothing Death Curse could do against them. At most, Shifeng's team would have to be a little more careful when leaving the city. However, now that Shifeng's team had 8 upper-class nobles, they'd have no trouble gaining many followers and the partnership of Slumber City's various peak powers. However, as soon as Echoing Judgment sighed in relief, Shifeng set his sights on the 2 NPC guard captains once more and asked, "Captains, in view of Vice City Lord Solitary Soul's slanderous behavior towards my friends, may I know if I have any authority to sanction him? If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible." Chapter 3118_Sanction a Vice City Lord? Sanction a Vice City Lord? What is he thinking? A Vice City Lord is already an administrator of the city. Even the City Lord probably doesn't have the authority to sanction a Vice City Lord. Shifeng's words instantly caused a commotion to erupt in the lobby. Although Shifeng didn't speak very loudly, everyone present was a Tier 3 expert. With their keen senses, they could hear even the sound of grass rustling over 100 yards away if they wanted to, let alone a player speaking within 100 yards. While the spectating crowd was discussing Shifeng's words, the 2 NPC guard captains surprisingly remained silent for a moment. Then, they looked at Shifeng with serious expressions on their faces. "Esteemed Lord Legatee, while you are the Abyss's successor, according to Slumber City's laws, unless a Vice City Lord has violated Slumber City's bottom line, even Lord City Lord and Lord Magistrate do not have the authority to arbitrarily sanction a Vice City Lord," the younger of the 2 guard captains said. "I knew it. How can anyone possibly sanction a Vice City Lord? Vice City Lords have the authority to determine a city's development direction. Even if he has greater authority than a Vice City Lord, there's no way he can sanction one without a valid reason. It's like how Vice City Lords can't target upper-class nobles, basically. But this guy really knows how to dream. Is he not afraid of sowing a permanent grudge with Death Curse?" The surrounding spectators didn't feel particularly surprised when they heard the guard captain's answer. A Vice City Lord was an NPC city's administrator. Meanwhile, the birth of an administrator was incredibly challenging. In addition to completing the temple trial, a player would also need to establish a power that ranked within the top 10 of the city's contribution ranking list. In other words, an NPC city could only have a maximum of 10 Vice City Lords at a time. One could easily imagine how high a status a Vice City Lord enjoyed. However, since the stratified Abyssal Realm's launch until now, aside from the mysterious Dark Sanctuary, the only NPC city known to have all 10 of its Vice City Lord positions filled was Shadow City, the city located in the level 120 map Dark Desert. Other NPC cities only had around 2 or 3 Vice City Lords. NPC cities with 4 Vice City Lords, such as the current Slumber City, could already rank among the top. Lord Legatee, if Vice City Lord Solitary Soul has offended you, according to the sacred rules set by the God of the Abyss, you can initiate an Abyss battle under the witness of the God of the Abyss. If you defeat Vice City Lord Solitary Soul, it will prove that Vice City Lord Solitary Soul is guilty. In that event, he will be stripped of his status as a Vice City Lord, the older of the 2 guard captains suddenly added. However, the Abyss battle is a sacred duel. You can only initiate it 3 times in your life, so please use it with caution. I can sanction him in such a way. Shifeng was a little stunned. Originally, Shifeng didn't hold much hope of dealing with Solitary Soul via the city. After all, a Vice City Lord held considerable influence over the NPC city they belonged to. He had only asked if he could sanction Solitary Soul since he was curious what his status as the Abyss Legate would allow him to accomplish. Shifeng wasn't the only one surprised by this situation right now. Everyone else was similarly taken aback by the older guard captain's words. How is this possible? A Vice City Lord can actually be sanctioned arbitrarily? What kind of authority does this legatee status have? Everyone in the hall stared at Shifeng in astonishment. Some of the upper-class nobles enjoying the show couldn't help but gulp nervously, a hint of fear appearing in their eyes. The position of upper-class nobles was only slightly lower than Vice City Lords in the various NPC cities. So long as a Vice City Lord wasn't crazy or an upper-class noble wasn't hell-bent on going against a Vice City Lord, upper-class nobles were essentially untouchable existences. However, it was now revealed that Shifeng's status afforded him the authority to sanction even Vice City Lords. If even Vice City Lords weren't safe from him, upper-class nobles naturally weren't, either. Meanwhile, without an NPC city to rely on, upper-class nobles would be reduced to nothing but a tool that inflicted a weakening debuff on Dark-type monsters. This is going to be interesting. A smile appeared on Wolf Emperor's face as he looked at Shifeng. Solitary Soul already has a pierce of legendary equipment now, so I can't even begin to guess his current strength. If this Lord Legatee dares to challenge Solitary Soul, I can use this opportunity to see how strong Solitary Soul has become. Wolf Emperor wasn't interested in the conflict between Shifeng and Solitary Soul in the slightest. His original goal had always been to challenge Solitary Soul after seeing the other party becoming a Vice City Lord. After all, while Solitary Soul might be the weakest out of the 4 Vice City Lords, the man was still a Vice City Lord nonetheless. Depending on how easily he managed to defeat Solitary Soul, he might consider whether he was strong enough to challenge Slumber City's strongest expert, Laura Crader. However, that was before Wolf Emperor had found out that Solitary Soul had obtained a piece of legendary equipment. He couldn't begin to estimate how strong Solitary Soul had become. He even suspected that Solitary Soul might have already become the strongest expert in Slumber City. After all, any legendary equipment could grant players the strength to transcend tiers. I doubt that kid will dare challenge Solitary Soul, Boss Wolf. After all, even the Glimmering Sword will have to be wary of Solitary Soul right now. Moreover, he only has 3 chances to initiate an Abyss battle. It's not worth wasting one of these precious chances on Solitary Soul, the level 116 swordsman youth standing next to Wolf Emperor said, shaking his head. He doubted that Shifeng would foolishly challenge Solitary Soul to a duel. Everyone in the lobby could sense the frightening aura Solitary Soul radiated. Unless Shifeng was also a Vice City Lord level expert with a piece of legendary equipment, it was unlikely he could defeat Solitary Soul. However, as soon as the swordsman youth finished speaking, Shifeng turned to Solitary Soul, who was looking at him contemptuously, and calmly said, "Then, on my name as the Abyss Legatee, I will initiate an Abyss battle with Vice City Lord Solitary Soul." Since Death Curse wanted to use them to set an example, Shifeng naturally wouldn't mind using Death Curse to make a name for himself, either. After all, fame was something necessary if he wanted to develop his own power in Slumber City. With his current strength, he was confident he could fight against even God-ranked experts who had reached Tier 4 already. Not to mention, Solitary Soul wasn't even a true Tier 4 player. Ha ha ha. This kid must be crazy. Does he really think he is invincible just because he managed to destroy an advanced combat puppet? Knight Revenant couldn't help but laugh when he saw Shifeng challenging Solitary Soul. Originally, they had been having trouble figuring out a way to get Shifeng's team kicked out of the city. After all, if they failed to take care of Shifeng's team, their plan to re-establish Death Curse's position in Slumber City would fail miserably. Yet, now, Shifeng was sending himself to them. "You want to challenge me? Good. Very good." Solitary Soul laughed as he looked at Shifeng. "I thought that my first opponent after becoming a Vice City Lord would be the Glimmering Sword. But since you want to fight, I'll fulfill your wish. I can also use this chance to let the Glimmering Sword know who is the true number 1 in Slumber City." As soon as Solitary Soul finished speaking, glowing runes suddenly started appearing on the black leather top he wore, the runes drawing the surrounding mana to him. Immediately, everyone in the lobby felt the mana around them suppressing them. Even the Temple Knight level experts present found their bodies becoming incredibly heavy, their flexibility dropping by several grades. What a powerful mana domain! Has it reached the Tier 4 standard already? Wolf Emperor subconsciously gasped when he experienced the effects of the mana domain radiated by Solitary Soul. As an upper-class noble, Wolf Emperor naturally possessed a good grasp over mana. He was even at the level of being able to form a mana domain already. Even so, his mana domain was only useful for increasing the power of his skills and spells. However, Solitary Soul's mana domain was actually capable of suppressing other players. The power of this suppression was even on par with the mana domains of Tier 4 NPCs. While subjected to this mana domain's effects, Wolf Emperor felt that he could, at most, exhibit 50% of his usual combat power. After Solitary Soul unleashed his mana domain, Echoing Judgment, Crimson Heart, Bloodhammer, and the others all wore ugly looks on their faces. One of the main reasons Tier 4 existences could stomp on Tier 3 existences was their Tier 4 mana domain. In front of a Tier 4 player with a mana domain, Tier 3 players would be no different from ants unless they possessed legendary weapons and equipment. However, unlike everyone else, Shifeng simply shrugged and calmly said to Solitary Soul, "Do you honestly think that you're the only pseudo-Tier 4 in Slumber City?" Immediately, a ripple of mana spread from Shifeng's body. Then, following the spread of this ripple, the suppression everyone experienced vanished without a trace. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3119-A Tier 4 Mana Domain. Night Revenant stared at Shifeng in disbelief when he saw Solitary Soul's mana domain getting pushed back. How is this possible? A Tier 4 mana domain? Night Revenant stared at Shifeng in disbelief when he saw Solitary Soul's mana domain getting pushed back. How is this possible? The biggest difference separating Tier 3 and Tier 4 players was the strength of their mana. With the mana body they had just created, Tier 3 players could just barely extend their mana out of their body, using it to strengthen their skills and spells to a certain extent. However, after reaching Tier 4, players would gain the ability to manipulate the mana around them, using it to strengthen their skills and spells by a significant margin. They could even suppress their enemies with their mana. It was obvious that Shifeng's mana domain had reached the Tier 4 standard. In fact, based on the situation, Shifeng's mana domain was stronger than even Solitary Soul's. Otherwise, Solitary Soul's mana domain wouldn't have lost its effect. What a powerful mana domain! Astonishment flashed across Wolf Emperor's eyes when he felt the suppressive effects of Solitary Soul's mana domain disappearing. When a Tier 3 player's mana reached the Tier 4 standard, they'd have an overwhelming advantage over other Tier 3 players. Setting aside the significant amplification effect such mana could bring, just the ability to prevent one's opponents from utilizing the mana around them would put one's opponent in a very disadvantageous situation. In a direct clash between Tier 3 skills and spells, the side that couldn't make use of their surrounding mana would most likely be killed instantly. Although Wolf Emperor didn't know how strong Shifeng's combat standard was, it was obvious that Shifeng stood at the pinnacle of Slumber City when it came to mana. Shifeng definitely had the qualifications to fight against Solitary Soul. At this time, even Laura Crader, who had remained silent and wore a disinterested look this entire time, couldn't help but take a closer look at Shifeng. Standing next to Laura, Sleeping Quicksand also couldn't help but look toward the unassuming Shifeng when she noticed the change in Laura's gaze. Is he really that strong? Laura might not have said anything, but Sleeping Quicksand understood that Shifeng had already gained Laura's recognition. It should be known that Laura was publicly recognized as the strongest expert in Slumber City, and never had anybody in the city manage to gain her recognition. Even when Solitary Soul revealed his possession of a piece of legendary equipment, Laura had only grown a little wary of him. How powerful! So, this is guild leader Black Flame's strength. Lin Yaoyue's eyes burned with a passionate flame as she looked at Shifeng. Lin Yaoyu used to be a Tier 4 expert on the main continent, so she understood just how big of a gap there was between Tier 3 and Tier 4 mana. Typically, even if a Tier 3 player managed to form a mana domain at Tier 3, the most they could do with it was improve their control over mana. They couldn't increase the inherent strength of their mana. Normally, if a Tier 3 player wished to improve the standard of their mana without increasing their tier, they'd have to rely on the help of legendary weapons and equipment. However, Shifeng obviously didn't possess any legendary weapons and equipment since he had come from the miniature ancient world like herself. In the current miniature ancient world, obtaining even fragmented legendary items was no different than a dream, let alone legendary items. Without legendary items, the only other way players could raise the standard of their mana from Tier 3 to Tier 4 was to rely on themselves. However, this was a mythical feat that only a handful of players could accomplish even on the main continent. It should be known that every one of those players was a peerless monster. They were invincible existences even among Tier 6 god-ranked experts, and every one of them could instill fear into even the 5 great super guilds. As for other super guilds, they didn't even dare to offend these peerless monsters. Unfortunately, none of those peerless experts were willing to accept followers for some reason. It didn't matter even if the person asking to be a follower was a Tier 6 god-ranked expert. This situation had caused countless experts and powers on the main continent to sigh in disappointment. Currently, though, there was no doubt that Shifeng had already reached the level of those peerless monsters. Amazing. As expected of someone from the Dark Sanctuary, with this kind of strength, he should have no trouble ranking among the top 10 of Shadow City. Echoing Judgment inwardly exclaimed as he looked at Shifeng. At the same time, he became even more determined to partner with Shifeng. There might be incredibly few players from the Dark Sanctuary operating in the stratified Abyssal Realms level 100+ maps, but it wasn't exactly difficult to meet with them. This was because almost those from the Dark Sanctuary would eventually move their base of operations to Shadow City. Hence, so long as one traveled to Shadow City, one could easily come across powers from the Dark Sanctuary. However, according to his understanding, there were many powers based in the Dark Sanctuary, and not all of these powers were equally strong. Although any power capable of exiting the Dark Sanctuary would almost certainly be a peak power or greater, there were still differences between them. Based on the frightening strength Shifeng had just displayed, Echoing Judgment was certain that Shifeng was stronger than most of the Dark Sanctuary experts in Shadow City. After all, experts whose mana had reached the Tier 4 standard were extremely rare, even in the Dark Sanctuary. There was no way an ordinary peak power would be willing to send such a powerful combatant out of the Dark Sanctuary. In fact, the Dark Sanctuary's powers would usually take the initiative to recruit experts with Tier 4 mana in Shadow City, and their promises to these experts were enough to cause countless experts in the stratified Abyssal Realm to drool in envy. Based on this situation, it could be seen just how high of a position experts with Tier 4 mana held in the Dark Sanctuary. While everyone was marveling at Shifeng's mana domain, the sound of a bell ringing suddenly came from the Abyssal Tower's topmost floor, the sound echoing throughout the entire Slumber City. Many players were confused by this ringing sound. However, before they could get to the bottom of this situation, everyone in the city received an announcement from the system. Slumber City Region System Announcement: Legatee Black Flame has initiated an abyss battle against Vice City Lord Solitary Soul. Following the ancient agreement, this duel will be conducted under the witness of the God of the Abyss. All players in the city will also have the chance to witness this battle. Players will only have 10 seconds to make a decision. Slumber City Region System Announcement: those who do not decide within the time limit will forfeit their right to witness the abyss battle. What's going on? Who's this Black Flame? He actually has the authority to challenge a Vice City Lord. Solitary Soul is one of Slumber City's top 5 experts. He has even completed the temple trial recently. Is the person who challenged Solitary Soul insane? Regardless, this is a rare opportunity to see Solitary Soul in action. The last time he fought against someone publicly was when he challenged a few of the top 10 experts previously. He's been immersed in training ever since, and nobody knows how strong he is exactly now. Following the system announcement, curiosity filled Slumber City's various powers and independent players. Everyone was curious to learn about the person known as Black Flame and how strong Solitary Soul had become after completing the temple trial. Hence, everyone chose to spectate the abyss battle without hesitation. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3120 _ Slumber City, Abyssal Tower. Slumber City, Abyssal Tower, following the ringing bell sound, an ancient and sacred aura spread across Slumber City, this aura instilling a sense of awe and submission into everyone in the city. After this aura swept across the entire city, players who had chosen to spectate the Abyss battle found themselves teleported to a magnificent arena located in the middle of a sea of stars. The arena was massive, occupying an area of over a dozen sports stadiums. It could easily fit several 100,000 spectators simultaneously. Of course, that definitely wasn't enough to accommodate Slumber City's several 100 million players. However, players weren't teleported directly to the arena's spectator stands. Instead, players were teleported to the countless independent spaces that existed within the arena, and each of these independent spaces had a replica of the main arena. So, even though the main arena itself could only accommodate several hundred spectators, it could, in reality, allow all of Slumber City's players to spectate the upcoming Abyss battle simultaneously. The only people on the arena's stage currently were Shifeng and Solitary Soul, and both of them were at level 120. Evidently, the main god system had equalized their levels for the sake of fairness. Meanwhile, after the participants and spectators were teleported to the arena, a timer appeared above the stage, indicating the seconds left until the Abyss battles start. 10, 9, 8, 7. I am really surprised. I didn't expect you to have not only significantly higher authority than me but also tier 4 mana. You can find yourself a place even in Shadow City with your strength and status, Solitary Soul said to Shifeng, smiling after he scanned the stage. If you hadn't disrupted our plans, we would have never wanted to make an enemy out of you. Unfortunately, you've made the wrong choice from the very beginning, which leaves us with no choice but to eradicate you and your team. This outcome will not change even if your mana has already reached the tier 4 standard. When Solitary Soul finished speaking, the timer also finished counting down. Then, Solitary Soul's figure thoroughly vanished from the stage. What a skillful soundless step. When Hidden Soul saw Solitary Soul disappearing from her sight, a solemn expression appeared on her face. Not only has he perfectly concealed his presence, but is also using his killing intent to layer his concealment. He's even managed to create up to 19 decoys. How much of a monster is he? Although Hidden Soul was sitting on the spectator stands, everything taking place on the stage was perfectly presented to the spectator stands. So, watching the fight from the spectator stands was no different than watching it directly on stage. Meanwhile, Soundless Steps happened to be a combat technique Hidden Soul was also skilled at. It was also the reason she dared to assassinate Tier 6 God-ranked experts. For a skilled assassin, it wasn't difficult to perfectly conceal their aura. What was difficult was using one's killing intent to misdirect one's target. Meanwhile, the more decoys one tried to create using killing intent, the more difficult it would be to accomplish the feat. Currently, Hidden Soul could create up to 16 decoys only. Moreover, that was after she had become a high demonkin. If she wanted to further increase that number, the complexity of the technique would increase by several times. Meanwhile, as far as she knew, not even one of her many assassin friends could create 19 killing intent decoys. In addition to showing how skillful he was, the fact that Solitary Soul could create 19 decoys with his killing intent meant that he could fake his attacks up to 19 times. So long as Shifeng made even one error in his judgment against Solitary Soul, it could become a fatal mistake. No matter how powerful a Tier 3 player was, there was a limit to the number of reactions they could make simultaneously. A player would be considered an expert among experts if they could carry out 12 or 13 reactions simultaneously. Typically, this was the level that domain realm experts were at. In the case of Tier 6 God-ranked experts, while they might be more skilled than the average domain realm expert, most God-ranked experts could only carry out around 14 or 15 simultaneous reactions. Hence, with her ability to create up to 15 decoys in the past, she could fell even Tier 6 God-ranked experts if they weren't careful. However, against Solitary Soul's 19 decoys, the average Tier 6 God-ranked expert would fall with a 100% certainty. At this moment, Hidden Soul wasn't the only person who had realized Solitary Soul's prowess. Crimson Heart, Bloodhammer, and the others similarly wore grave expressions on their faces. It was especially true for Bloodhammer and Marion. They never thought they would come across such a terrifying expert in Slumber City, which was only one of many NPC cities in the stratified abyssal realm. A fourth-floor expert. Bloodhammer couldn't believe his eyes when he saw Solitary Soul disappearing from his perception. Weren't stratified abyssal realms supposed to have only a handful of fourth-floor experts? Why are there so many fourth-floor experts in this stratified abyssal realm? According to the information Bloodhammer collected through eavesdropping on the conversation of others, he knew that Solitary Soul only ranked among the top 5 of Slumber City when it came to strength. More specifically, he ranked 4th or 5th. This meant that there were 3 or 4 more players of Solitary Soul's caliber in Slumber City. There were hundreds of NPC cities found in the stratified abyssal realms level 100+ maps. If every NPC city had around 5 fourth-floor experts. While Bloodhammer and Marion were in a daze, Shafong briefly scanned the empty stage before him and said, "Put away your little trick. This move is useless against me." After saying so, Shafong brandished the Winter of Eternal Night. Swords Orbit. After Shafong had continually developed Swords Orbit during his previous life, it had already reached the standard of bronze combat techniques. The instant he executed the combat technique, several dozen sword lights spread out from him like a blooming lotus flower. Not only could each of these sword lights reach up to several dozen yards away, but every one of them also left a dark rift in space as they moved away from Shafong. The sword lights left no room to hide on the stage, and Solitary Soul was quickly forced to break his footwork and come out of stealth. However, before any of the sword lights could hit him, he suddenly switched to a seemingly slower footwork. Then, as if Solitary Soul had become a ghost, Shafong's sword lights passed through him harmlessly as he rapidly closed the distance between himself and Shafong. When Solitary Soul moved within 10 yards of Shafong, the 2 daggers he wielded suddenly snapped forward like whips, leaving behind countless afterimages as they executed over a dozen different feints and attacks in the blink of an eye. What a well-honed Godspeed reflex! Shafong couldn't help but be surprised by the rapid shifts Solitary Soul executed in his attack. Even so, he did not stop brandishing the Winter of Eternal Night. Swords Orbit could be regarded as Shafong's roots. It was also the defensive technique he was most proficient in. After developing it to the bronze standard, the combat technique was improved significantly. In the technique's current state, unless he was going up against an overwhelmingly stronger opponent, it was highly unlikely for any attack to break through his defenses. Boom! 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 A series of explosions rang out on the stage, each subsequent explosion louder than the one before. The explosion count quickly reached into the hundreds, and it felt as if several hundred missiles were bombarding the stage. Space in the middle of the stage had also shattered completely, several dozen 100-meter spatial tiers forming on the stage. At one point, the explosions had gotten so powerful that their shockwaves had even spread through the barrier isolating the stage, reaching the rest of the arena. After the explosions ended, Solitary Soul's figure appeared among the mending spatial tiers. At this time, Solitary Soul had already lost 30% of his HP, and both of his hands showed faint signs of trembling. This scene dumbfounded the spectating audience. What's going on? Solitary Soul is actually at a disadvantage. How strong is this black flame guy? The spectating crowd widened their eyes in shock when they saw Shafong completely intact. Solitary Soul's strength was widely known and recognized. Yet, even with a piece of legendary equipment, Solitary Soul had still lost to Shafong in a direct confrontation. However, Solitary Soul didn't seem to mind this outcome as he looked at Shafong with a calm expression. "I can see why you dared to challenge me. Your strength attribute is simply monstrous," Solitary Soul said as he tried to shake the numbness out of his hands. Then, narrowing his eyes fiercely, he continued, "I had thought of saving this move for the glimmering sword, but now it seems that I'll have to use it on you first." Immediately after Solitary Soul finished speaking, the glowing runes covering his black leather top shone with a much brighter glow. At the same time, everyone in the arena could feel something change within Solitary Soul. Specifically, everyone experienced a suppressive effect that resulted from a difference in life rating. "You've thoroughly entered the Tier 4 standard already." When Shafong sensed the change in Solitary Soul's life rating, he realized that the assassin was no longer a Tier 3 player. Instead, Solitary Soul was now a bona fide Tier 4 player. Previously, Solitary Soul's physique, basic attributes, and mana might have reached the Tier 4 standard already, but he still wasn't a true Tier 4 player. He was only a pseudo-Tier 4 player. In fact, when it came to the strength attribute, Shifeng wasn't the least bit afraid of Solitary Soul. In addition to being a primal human, Shifeng was also in possession of the Winter of Eternal Night and the Abyssal Eye, two top-tier fragmented legendary items. He might not be able to match a player with a legendary weapon, but he had no problems matching an assassin with only one piece of legendary equipment. Not to mention, while everyone in the stratified abyssal realm was subjected to the power of darkness, he had the Abyssal Eyes help to halve the effects of this suppression. Hence, when it came to the strength attribute, there was no way Solitary Soul could beat Shifeng. Now, however, Solitary Soul had clearly reached Tier 4 already. His life rating was completely different from that of a Tier 3 player. Indeed. I have now transformed into a Tier 4 Shadow Manipulator. All of my basic attributes have increased by 40%, and I have also gained access to all Tier 4 skills and taboo skills available to the Shadow Manipulator class, Solitary Soul said, a hint of excitement appearing in his eyes. Now, I'll let you experience the strength of a true Tier 4. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 193, Abyssal Power. Chapter 193, Abyssal Power. As soon as Solitary Soul finished speaking, he instantly split into several dozen illusions of himself, each giving off a similar presence as his original body. Then, every one of these doppelgangers appeared around Shifeng in the blink of an eye and attacked him simultaneously. Spatial Mirage. Hidden Soul frowned when she saw Solitary Soul's doppelgangers filling the stage. Spatial Mirage was a Tier 4 taboo skill that allowed the user to split into several dozen copies of themselves. However, the user could reduce the number of doppelgangers they summoned if they could not control all of them. Meanwhile, not only were the doppelgangers real entities, but they also had the exact same basic attributes as the user. In addition, so long as even one doppelganger remained alive during the skill's 1-minute duration, the original body would not die. Because of Spatial Mirage's effects, it was labeled as the strongest single-target skill out of all Tier 4 skills available to assassins. After all, not only did the skill allow its user to rain their opponent with a large number of attacks, but it also allowed the user to stay near invincible for 1 minute. Come. Shifeng stopped holding back when he saw Solitary Soul's doppelgangers attacking him from all directions. Immediately, he activated World of Frost, the Winter of Eternal Night's second active skill. If he wanted to go against a Tier 4 taboo skill in his current state, his only option was to use a Tier 4 skill or spell. He'd only be seeking an early death if he used a Tier 3 skill or spell. This was because there was a great disparity in the mana Tier 3 and Tier 4 skills could access. In God's domain, a clash between skills would often be decided by the mana each side held. It wouldn't matter even if a skill's effect was superior. It would most likely lose if it went up against a skill that had carried significantly more mana. Hence, it was impossible for low-tier skills to go up against high-tier skills. The current Winter of Eternal Night might not be at its peak, but its additional skills were already at the Tier 4 standard. In a certain sense, its skills were even stronger than the average Tier 4 skill and spell. Immediately, 9 frost swords appeared around Shifeng, each frost sword carrying 120% of his strength. Then, Shifeng executed Sword's Orbit once more against Solitary Soul's doppelgangers. Unlike before, Shifeng was executing Sword's Orbit with 9 weapons this time. Hence, the galaxy of stars that formed around him created a much tighter defensive network than before. Moreover, every one of the stars that surrounded him exerted destructive power at the Tier 4 peak standard. Boom! 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 The clash between swords and daggers taking place right now was many times more intense than before. For a time, the stage looked like it was hosting a fight between two 1,000-man teams rather than a duel between 2 players, the scene flabbergasting the spectating audience. They're so strong. So, this is a Vice City Lord level fight? Even though I'm a Temple Knight already, why do I get the feeling that I won't last more than a move against them? When Slumber City's many experts saw the clash between Shifeng and Solitary Soul, they felt their worldview shattering. No matter how they looked at it, there was no way they could interfere in such a high-level fight. In fact, if it weren't for the barrier isolating the stage from the rest of the arena, they doubted that they could even spectate the fight from such a close distance. Any stray attack that struck them could probably kill them instantly. The might of legendary equipment is truly extraordinary, Wolf Emperor inwardly exclaimed, his blood boiling in excitement. At the same time, he also mentally assessed how long he could last against Shifeng and Solitary Soul in a fight. In the meantime, on the stage, Solitary Soul had clearly gained the upper hand after activating Spatial Mirage. He had an overwhelming advantage in both numbers and raw power. Although Shifeng's defense was nigh impeccable, his 9 frost swords creating a barrier that neutralized the attacks of Solitary Soul's doppelgangers, it was inevitable for cracks to appear after defending against such a large number of attacks over such a long period of time. Sure enough, Shifeng eventually started to let 1 or 2 doppelgangers slip past his defensive network from time to time. Although he had promptly rectified these mistakes by deflecting the doppelgangers' attacks with his sword, Solitary Soul's doppelgangers wielded strength rivaling level 120 superior mythics. Even after he redirected a portion of their attack's power, he still suffered over 10,000 damage per hit. Currently, Shifeng's HP was at an extraordinary 1.27 million, thanks to his Tier 4 basic attributes. That was more than double what the average Tier 3 metric tons had. However, a loss of 10,000 HP per attack was not something he could afford to shrug off due to Solitary Soul's extremely high attack frequency. After roughly 50 seconds had passed since Solitary Soul activated Spatial Mirage, Shifeng had already lost 2/3 of his HP. In comparison, Solitary Soul's losses were much smaller. Although Solitary Soul had lost a few dozen doppelgangers due to his fearless attack method, he still retained over 20 doppelgangers. Meanwhile, so long as even one of his doppelgangers lived, his main body would not die. "You really are a tough bastard to survive for so long," Solitary Soul said, scoffing when he saw that he only had a short time left before Spatial Mirage's effect ran out. "But everything is over now. Tier 4 Legacy Berserk Skill, Shadow Possession." The strength of Solitary Soul's aura skyrocketed once more, reaching a point where many of the spectating Tier 3 players found themselves having difficulty breathing. Is this his true strength? Wolf Emperor's expression grew serious when he saw this sudden turn of events. Based on his perception, Solitary Soul gave off the same presence as the superior mythic bosses he had encountered in the past. If Solitary Soul combined the raw power of a superior mythic monster with combat techniques, he could unleash devastating destruction. Subsequently, Solitary Soul's remaining doppelgangers attacked Shifeng from multiple directions, their speed so fast that many of the Tier 3 experts present couldn't even keep up with them. "Over. Do you honestly think you're the only one with a berserk skill?" When Shifeng saw Solitary Soul's doppelgangers coming at him again, he promptly activated the berserk skill that came with the Abyssal Eye. Abyssal Power. This would also be the first time Shifeng used this skill after obtaining the Abyssal Eye. Immediately, the berserk skill increased his defense by 100%, strength by 150%, agility by 60%, physique by 50%, and endurance by 100%. Boom! At this moment, black fog surrounded Shifeng, and his eyes turned pitch black completely, the transformation making him look like the incarnation of darkness. The flow of time around him also started to slow down. As for the 9 frost swords, they disintegrated due to their inability to coexist with the power of the abyss. However, Shifeng didn't feel surprised by this and held the winter of eternal night horizontally. In God's domain, berserk skills could not coexist with many skills. Normally, when players used a berserk skill in a duel with another player, it meant that they were ready to end the fight by either killing their opponent or getting killed. In a situation where Solitary Soul had an overwhelming advantage in basic attributes, Shifeng decided it was best if he didn't withhold his berserk skill. Disappear. Immediately, Shifeng executed a horizontal slash against the doppelgangers coming at him from all directions. Second Sword, Holy Devour. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 31:22 When Shifeng swung his sword, crimson flames swept across the stage and incinerated everything into nothingness. The sight of the sea of flames devouring even space itself caused the spectating crowd to gasp. When Shifeng swung his sword, crimson flames swept across the stage and incinerated everything into nothingness. The sight of the sea of flames devouring even space itself caused the spectating crowd to gasp. What a terrifying mana technique! Who the hell is this guy? Wolf Emperor exclaimed, a grave expression appearing on his face. Mana techniques might be common in the stratified abyssal realm, but most of the mana techniques in the hands of Slumber City's peak powers could only exhibit power rivaling Tier 3 skills and spells. There were also a few mana techniques capable of reaching the standard of Tier 4 skills and spells, but those were Dark-type mana techniques. However, the mana technique Shifeng used was clearly of the fire element. Yet, in addition to being capable of incinerating even space itself, those flames also gave Wolf Emperor the feeling that he would get burnt into nothingness so long as they touched him. The power of this mana technique far surpassed the power of the average Tier 4 skill and spell. It should be known that mana techniques did not have cooldowns like skills and spells. So long as players had enough stamina and concentration, they could use mana techniques multiple times in a row. Hence, mana techniques were worth much more than skills and spells on the market. On average, it would take a Tier 3 Dark-type skill or spell to match the value of a mana technique capable of exhibiting Tier 3 power. In the case of a mana technique capable of exhibiting power surpassing Tier 4 skills and spells, Wolf Emperor couldn't even begin to imagine its value since he had never heard of such a mana technique appearing in the stratified abyssal realm. However, the powerful flames Shifeng created did not deter Solitary Soul in the slightest. Immediately, several of his doppelgangers began brandishing the daggers they wielded, the phantom of a dark wolf appearing around each of these doppelgangers as they charged at the oncoming sea of flames. He even has a dark-type mana technique. How much strength has Solitary Soul kept hidden? Echoing Judgment's expression turned incredibly gloomy when he saw the wolf phantoms on the stage. The mana technique Solitary Soul just used had clearly reached the Tier 4 standard already. Moreover, it was even a Dark-type mana technique. Combined with his legendary equipment, Solitary Soul could easily rank among the top 5 of Shadow City, the #1 city in the stratified abyssal realm. Even Laura Crader was unlikely to be Solitary Soul's match now. At this point, Echoing Judgment could already foresee Death Curse becoming the #1 power in Slumber City. Once that happened, Purple Light's days in Slumber City would be numbered. However, before Echoing Judgment could lament the fate of Purple Light for long, the sea of flames and wolf phantoms clashed. Boom! A deafening explosion echoed throughout the entire arena, and the resulting shockwaves caused the stage's defensive barrier to shake violently. Although the barrier eventually calmed down without breaking, everyone still couldn't help but feel insecure when they saw the space above the entire arena turning into an empty void. Once the dust settled, the spectating audience couldn't help but be dumbfounded by what they saw. How is this possible? The stage got destroyed. Is this the strength of Vice City Lord-level players? At this time, the stage used to host the fight was nowhere to be seen, and taking its place was a massive crater. Moreover, spatial tiers filled the space above the crater, the area rendered completely inhospitable. Meanwhile, hovering above the crater were 5 figures, of which 4 belonged to Solitary Soul's doppelgangers. At this time, though, these doppelgangers had already lost over 10% of their HP. Evidently, they had suffered some damage from the feedback of the clash just now. Who are you? How can you overpower even my heaven-devouring wolf? Solitary Soul shouted, a hint of fear flashing past his eyes for the first time as he looked at Shifeng. Heaven-devouring wolf was the greatest fortuitous encounter Solitary Soul had come across. It was also his strongest trump card. With this mana technique, he was confident he could challenge even the 10 Vice City Lords of Shadow City and achieve good results. Yet, even though Solitary Soul had already used Heaven-Devouring Soul against Shifeng, not only did he fail to kill Shifeng, but he didn't even manage to deal a single point of damage to Shifeng. The only change he noticed was Shifeng's slightly paler complexion. In comparison, he had suffered some damage from the clash. At this time, Solitary Soul wasn't the only one confused by this situation. Even Wolf Emperor and the other spectators were greatly shocked. Solitary Soul's strength was clear for all to see. In addition to having a piece of legendary equipment, he even possessed a dark-type mana technique. Yet, Solitary Soul had still lost to Shifeng even with such favorable conditions. This was simply unbelievable. "Who am I? I'm the person who's about to send you on your way." Shifeng didn't bother offering Solitary Soul with any explanations. Instead, he promptly executed a horizontal slash, unleashing another holy devour at the other party. Immediately, a sea of flames devoured the space within the defensive barrier once more, the coverage of the attack leaving Solitary Soul with no choice but to resist it with heaven-devouring wolf again. Once, twice, thrice. Solitary Soul's doppelgangers lost a portion of their HP every time they blocked Shifeng's attacks. At the same time, the doppelgangers' complexion also grew increasingly paler, and the trembling of their hands worsened continuously. Seeing this scene, the spectating audience finally understood what it meant to truly overwhelm a person by force. Solitary Soul could neither dodge nor block Shifeng's attacks perfectly. The only thing he could do was watch as his HP gradually disappeared. After Shifeng executed Holy Devour for the 10th time, Solitary Soul's 4 remaining doppelgangers faded out of existence, and Solitary Soul's main body appeared before everyone's eyes. At this time, though, Solitary Soul's HP had already fallen to 0. Then, his vision darkened, and his body lifelessly fell into the crater. At the same time, the melodious sound of ringing bells echoed throughout the arena, and the victor's name was displayed above the stage-turned crater. Black Flame. The commander actually lost. When Night Revenant and the other members of Death Curse saw Solitary Soul's body disintegrating into countless particles of light, an incomparably ugly expression appeared on their faces. None of them could believe what had just happened. Night Revenant was especially dumbfounded by this outcome. In Night Revenant's opinion, Shifeng was merely an outsider from who knows where. Meanwhile, there were countless such outsiders appearing in Slumber City every day. Even if these outsiders possessed incredible individual strength, there was little they could do in Slumber City. In front of Death Curse, these outsiders were still insignificant existences. Yet, Shifeng had not only caused Death Curse to lose an advanced combat puppet, but he had also defeated Death Curse's commander now. He had even permanently deprived Death Curse of his status as a Vice City Lord. How could Night Revenant possibly bring himself to believe this situation? He won. Crap. How strong is this guy? I think the Glimmering Sword is the only person who can match him now. After the spectators fell silent for a moment, they quickly broke into exclamations. It was especially true for the executives of Slumber City's various powers. The way they looked at Shifeng and his team had changed completely. After all, Death Curse was thoroughly finished in Slumber City now. Even if Solitary Soul possessed incredible individual prowess and could possibly rank among the top 3 of Slumber City, without his status as a Vice City Lord, its development in Slumber City would be severely restricted. A player's status was incredibly important in the NPC cities of the stratified Abyssal Realms level 100+ maps. This was because many of the various NPC cities' benefits required players to have a certain status to obtain. Now that Death Curse had offended Shifeng, someone with authority greater than even Vice City Lords, the adventurer team would have a very difficult time surviving in Slumber City. Not to mention, 7 of Shifeng's teammates were also upper-class nobles. In the meantime, inside the crater, Shifeng suddenly noticed that an item had appeared in place of Solitary Soul's body. Moreover, this item radiated an incredibly familiar aura. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3123 _ An Ancient God's Possession? An Ancient God's Possession? When Shifeng looked at the fragmented tablet on the ground, he could sense a divine might unique to ancient gods. Although it was very weak, this divine might wasn't something gods could possess. If an ordinary Tier 3 player were subjected to this divine might, they couldn't even get close to within 10 yards of the item. If they tried to, they would either be rendered immobile or unconscious. Upon seeing the ancient god's item, Shifeng promptly picked it up and put it into his bag without hesitation. In God's domain, even the possession of normal gods could cause superpowers and Tier 6 god-ranked experts to go crazy. So, it was truly a pleasant surprise for Shifeng to obtain an ancient god's item after killing Solitary Soul. It should be known that players wouldn't normally drop items when they died in an official duel overseen by the main god system. Yet, Solitary Soul had still dropped the dilapidated tablet after dying. This showed just how extraordinary of an item the tablet was. However, before Shifeng had time to inspect the tablet's information, a system announcement suddenly rang in his ears. Slumber City Region System Announcement. Under the God of the Abyss's witness, Vice City Lord Solitary Soul has been deemed guilty. In addition to being deprived of his status as Slumber City's Vice City Lord, he will also lose 10 levels and be prohibited from logging into the game for 30 natural days. The system announcement repeated 3 times, the announcement's content causing everyone in the arena to gasp involuntarily. Crap! What kind of penalty is this? Death Curse will probably have to withdraw from Slumber City completely now. Prohibited from logging into God's domain for 30 days and losing 10 levels? With the threat of such a penalty in place, who would dare make an enemy out of Black Flame in Slumber City in the future? Even the upper-class nobles will have to tread carefully around this Black Flame from now on. Slumber City's various powers and independent players grew very fearful of Shifeng after hearing the system announcement. Even the aloof upper-class nobles were no exception. A drop of 10 levels wasn't a huge problem for players living in the stratified abyssal realm since death was a normal occurrence here. However, the 30-day prohibition from logging into God's domain was a punishment worse than death. God's domain had long since become part of everyone's lives. Many people even relied on God's domain to make a living. It was especially true for the various powers executives. If they couldn't log into God's domain for 30 days, it wouldn't even be surprising if they got eliminated from the front lines. While Slumber City's players were discussing this matter, everyone in the arena got teleported back to Slumber City. In Shifeng's case, he found himself teleported straight to Slumber City's City Hall. There was also an elegant old man standing before Shifeng with a small wooden box in his hands. "Greetings, Lord Legatee. I am Florentine, the magistrate of Slumber City. Under the God of the Abyss's witness, you have exposed the despicable crimes of Vice City Lord Solitary Soul. As a reward for your contribution, you will become Slumber City's new Vice City Lord from today onward. I hope you can make outstanding contributions to Slumber City," the old man said as he took out a black lion emblem from the wooden box and handed it over to Shifeng. Slumber City Region System Announcement. Congratulations to Black Flame for gaining Magistrate Florentine's recognition and becoming Slumber City's first Vice City Lord. Slumber City Region System Announcement. A player has become Slumber City's first Vice City Lord. Slumber City's system update activated. Slumber City will undergo an update for 1 natural day. All players in Slumber City will be forcibly logged out in half an hour. Players are advised to make the necessary preparations. The city's getting an update. What's going on? First Vice City Lord? Was there such a status in NPC cities? Crap. I must be dreaming. It's a city update. Slumber City actually got a city update. The last time a city update happened was when Shadow City filled all 10 of its Vice City Lord spots, and this update instantly propelled Shadow City into the stratified abyssal realm's #1 city. I never thought our Slumber City would receive a city update as well. Our city's going to soar now. Many players were confused by the abrupt city update announced by the system. However, many of Slumber City's veteran powers couldn't help but grow ecstatic by this news. A city update might be foreign to most ordinary players since the last time a city update appeared was over a decade ago. However, veteran players would definitely remember it still since it had shaken the entire stratified abyssal realm back then. Meanwhile, a city update was essentially a promotion for an NPC city. Moreover, this promotion would have a huge impact on the city and its players. Solitary Soul will probably wish to die once he learns about this city update, echoing Judgment thought as he looked at the system announcement. At this time, even he couldn't help but pity Solitary Soul and Death Curse a little. In addition to being one of Slumber City's peak powers, The Purple Light Chamber of Commerce also had business dealings with many NPC cities. It even had some connections in Shadow City. Hence, Echoing Judgment knew just how much help a city update could provide to a city's residents. At this time, Echoing Judgment could already foresee powers from the neighboring NPC cities and cities that were even farther away rushing to Slumber City after learning about the city update and partnering with Slumber City's local powers. So, it wouldn't be strange for Slumber City's local powers to see a sudden spike in their strength. However, Solitary Soul would be missing out on this opportunity. He had even lost his status as a Vice City Lord. It should be known that Vice City Lords would receive many more benefits from the promotion of an NPC city than other players. These additional benefits were so valuable that they could elevate the strength of a peak power like Death Curse to the next level. After all, a city's promotion would also mean the introduction of new functions. This city promotion might be a chance for us to go back, Laura, a 3-meter-tall, level 120 middle-aged man said, smiling as he looked at the woman with light blue hair standing next to him. With your current strength, you'll definitely give those people a big surprise. Don't get your hopes up. You've seen Shadow City's situation for yourself. Even those 10 Vice City Lords from Shadow City don't have any clues to help us get back. We are people who have been ousted, after all. There's no way we can return to the world above so easily, Laura said, shaking her head. The ancient abyssal god has sealed this place too tightly. We've been searching for a way to leave since the first appearance of players in this stratified abyssal realm, yet we still haven't found any clues to leave this place, the middle-aged man said, sighing. Meanwhile, inside the abyssal tower's lobby. First Vice City Lord. Guild leader Black Flame is always amazing no matter where he goes, Crimson Heart said, a bitter smile forming on her face as she looked at the system announcement. It seems we'll need to have a chat with the guild leader after we log off. Cleansed Rue, who stood beside Crimson Heart, nodded in agreement. The stratified abyssal realm standards were vastly superior to the standards of their god's domain. Now that Shifeng had become Slumber City's first Vice City Lord, it meant that Zero Wing had already established a solid foothold in Slumber City. Meanwhile, with Slumber City's support, they could already imagine how frightening Zero Wing's development in the miniature ancient world would become. While everyone in Slumber City was carrying out their own considerations and plans, Shifeng borrowed a VIP lounge in the city hall to inspect the dilapidated tablet in his bag. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3124 Inside the City Hall's VIP Lounge. Inside the City Hall's VIP Lounge. When Shifeng took out the dilapidated tablet, an ancient god's divine might instantly envelop the entire lounge. The presence of the ancient abyssal god's phantom in the arena had suppressed the tablet previously. However, now that the tablet was no longer being suppressed, it could unleash its divine might in full. Fortunately, the city hall was protected by an incredibly strong defensive magic array that could resist being bombarded by Tier 4 attacks for a long time. So, the divine might did not affect the building in any way. It is extraordinary, as expected. Even Tier 4 experts might suffer a mental collapse against such a powerful divine might, Shifeng thought, feeling a little surprised as he looked at the dilapidated tablet in his hands. The average ancient god's possession could, at most, prevent Tier 3 players from getting close to them. In the case of ancient god's possessions that could cause Tier 4 players to suffer a mental collapse, they were incredibly rare even in the greater god's domain. Meanwhile, their value typically rivaled legendary equipment or more. Immediately, Shifeng used his Eyes of Reality to identify the dilapidated tablet. The Eyes of Reality was an innate skill of primal humans. When left in a passive state, it would allow Shifeng to perceive the operating principles of the mana around him. When used actively, it could serve as a master rank identification skill that could easily see through various disguises and identify items. 10 seconds. 20 seconds. 30 seconds. As the Eyes of Reality continued analyzing the tablet's divine might also grew stronger and stronger. By the 1-minute mark, the divine might had grown so powerful that Shifeng's complexion had started to pale. The divine might has already reached the Tier 4 peak standard after only a minute. What is this item? Shifeng was greatly confused as he looked at the dilapidated tablet. All possessions of ancient gods might carry divine might, but most would only carry divine might at the Tier 4 standard. Even then, these items were plenty incredible already. However, an item that could radiate divine might at the Tier 4 peak standard was something Shifeng had never heard of before. It should be known that the effects of an ancient god's Tier 4 peak divine might could rival an ordinary god's Tier 5 divine might. It could easily cause even Tier 4 players to suffer a mental collapse, forcing them into a slumbering state. Although Shifeng had a special technique that could help him resist the effects of divine might, he was only a Tier 3 Sword King right now. His body's various parameters might have reached the Tier 4 standard already, but he still wasn't an actual Tier 4 Sword Emperor. So, there was a limit to what the technique could do for him. Hurry up. Shifeng grew a little anxious as he looked at the loading bar before him. Currently, the loading bar was already at 90% progress. So long as he could complete the identification process, the divine might would automatically revert to its original state. If he couldn't hold on until the identification process was completed, he would most likely have to wait until he got promoted to Tier 4 before he could try analyzing the tablet again. After all, he was already at the pseudo-Tier 4 standard right now. There was very little he could do to develop his mental capacity. However, the ancient god's possession before him would drop on death in its current unidentified state. Moreover, it could only be kept in his personal bag space and could not be traded to other people. This meant that he would have to carry it around with him all the time, and this would greatly restrict his activities. If this were merely an ordinary item, he wouldn't have minded losing it. However, this was an ancient god's possession that could radiate divine might at the Tier 4 peak standard. He'd probably die from heartbreak if he lost it. As the progress bar continued filling up, the divine might strength also continued to grow. Eventually, the divine might had grown so strong that Shifeng started to feel the world around him spin. Evidently, his mind could no longer resist the effects of this divine might. When Shifeng's vision started to turn grey, the pleasant sound of a notification rang in his ears. This sound signified the completion of the identification process. Once the tablet was identified successfully, the divine might that flooded the room disappeared into the tablet like a receding tide. Finally, Shifeng's grayed and blurred vision also started to recover. Then, after taking a moment to recover his bearings, he looked at the tablet in his hands and wondered, how did Solitary Soul get his hands on such an extraordinary item? It should be known that Shifeng used to be a Tier 6 sword god. Even if his mental capacity was being limited by his Tier 3 body, his willpower still far exceeded the standards of the average Tier 4 player. Yet, the dilapidated tablet before him had very nearly caused him to lose consciousness. This was simply unbelievable. Meanwhile, after the identification process ended, the tablet's information also appeared before Shifeng. Abyss Workshop Certification, Legendary Rank Item, a certification of glory in the past. Although it is now damaged, it can still be used to teleport to the Abyss Workshop. Cannot be traded. There is a 30% of dropping on death. Automatically disappears if stored in a warehouse for more than 30 natural days. Additional Skill 1 Abyss Teleportation. Teleport to the Abyss Workshop from any location. Each teleportation will cost 500 dark crystals. Cooldown, 30 natural days. Additional Skill 2 World-Breaking Teleportation. Forcibly opens a world-breaking gate at a pre-designated location. Up to 3 locations can be saved. Each gate can only transfer up to 10 people. Each gate activation costs 3,000 units of 7 luminaries crystal. Cooldown, 10 natural days. While the Abyss Workshop certification might be damaged, it can absorb god crystals to restore its power. Current restoration progress, 0-10. What? Shifeng exclaimed when he saw the tablet's information. There were 3 great workshops in the Greater God's domain, and every one of them was in possession of the strongest technologies available in the Greater God's domain. Meanwhile, the Abyss Workshop was one of these 3 great workshops. However, the 3 great workshops were extremely mysterious, and finding them was a huge challenge. Among the 3 great workshops, the Abyss Workshop was even rumored to sell epic combat puppets. An epic combat puppet possessed the strength of a Tier 6 god. Even when driven by a Tier 1 player, an epic combat puppet could clash against a Tier 6 god. This was a Tier 6 god they were talking about, not a Tier 6 player. Every Tier 6 god had enough strength to go up against a group of Tier 6 players. If players wanted to kill a Tier 6 god, they'd have to pay a heavy price. If he could get his hands on several epic combat puppets, he could flatten even the greater god's domain's hegemonic powers. Aside from the ability to teleport to the Abyss Workshop, the Abyss Workshop certification also had the world-breaking teleportation skill. This skill was not the least bit inferior to the Abyss teleportation skill. Many worlds in God's domain were subjected to strict travel restrictions. Examples of such worlds would be the various stratified abyssal realms. However, with the world-breaking teleportation skill, he could travel back and forth from such restricted worlds with ease in the future. The only problem was the exorbitant cost of 3,000 units of 7 luminaries crystal per use. An ordinary second-rate guild probably couldn't even afford to use this skill even if they got their hands on the Abyss Workshop certification. After all, 7 luminaries crystals was a rare resource in God's domain. Any location that produced 7 luminaries crystals would be heavily contested by the various powers. It wouldn't even be surprising to see super guilds going to war over such resource nodes. However, if it meant being able to freely travel between the stratified abyssal realm and the miniature ancient world, Shafone wouldn't mind paying the 7 luminaries crystals. In fact, considering that he could bring the stratified abyssal realms players into the miniature ancient world, the cost of 300 units of 7 luminaries crystal was a very low price to pay. While Shafone was thinking about how he could maximize the use of the Abyss Workshop certification and obtain a large amount of 7 luminaries crystals, another system notification rang in his ears. System, you still have 15 minutes to go offline. Please make the necessary preparations. 15 minutes. I guess I'll log out and get some rest in advance, Shafone decided when he saw the system notification. Using Holy Devour 10 times consecutively had exhausted his mind significantly. Combined with the divine might he had to resist just now, his mind had long since reached its limits. So, now was a good time for him to get some rest. Subsequently, Shafone put the Abyss Workshop certification away and logged out of the game, his body disappearing from the lounge. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,